Hey everybody, welcome to this week's live chat. I'm excited that you're joining me again. Just for those of you that are newer here, this is something I do every week. We usually talk about something about free motion quilting or quilting in general, and then I answer your questions. So it's just a great way to connect and hang out. And good news, everybody that has been watching the chats, I get on early and we kind of chat and type questions and answers and stuff before it starts, usually about a half an hour before. But one of the questions that came up was, how do we find the live chat before it goes live? And I promised everyone I would try to figure it out, and I think I have. So if you're wanting to see the upcoming live chats that are scheduled so you can get on there early and chat, go to my YouTube channel, and then it's right there. It just says scheduled live streams. So now it'll be really easy for you to find them in advance instead of waiting for it to come live and then trying to rush over and find it. And of course, if you can't make the chats live, I leave them on my YouTube channel so you can check them out at your convenience. So super excited about that. First of all, we do giveaways, and so Deb Ninas is the winner of last week's giveaway, and then this week's giveaway is going to be for the Twist in Time quilt kit. I'll show you what that looks like in just a second. But to enter, you're going to go to the description box below after the chat's over and click the link and enter your name, and I'll pick a winner next week. All right, first of all though, before we talk about our topic, this week's chat is going to be about combining free motion quilting designs and how to use it to add interest to your quilts. But before we get into that, just a word about next week's live chat. So I had a chat scheduled for next Thursday, of course, every week, but I'm going to have to move that to the Monday afterwards. So no live chat next week. It's going to be on Monday. So the week after, we'll actually have two chats that week. I'm going to be out of town enjoying spring break with the family. So a week from Monday, March 22nd, will be the next live chat, and that's when I'm going to reveal the next Free Motion Challenge Quilting Along. But in order to soothe out the fact that we're not going to have one next week, I'm going to give you a sneak peek at the very end, just of the panel and the supplemental fabrics. So I'm excited to show you. I hope you like it. If you don't like it, don't tell me, because I've already ordered all the fabric, so it's too late to turn back now. Anyway, okay, back to the main topic, combining quilting designs. So let's look at this quilt right here. So this is the Twist in Time quilt, and I've shown this before on the live chat. It's English paper pieced, and it's my first ever English paper piece project, so super excited about it. And this is actually going to be an episode of the Midnight Quilter, and it should be going live in the next day or two. Just, you know, I'm a little bit behind on it due to things, but it's going to be fun. But what I want to show you, what we're really going to talk about here, is some of the quilting that I did in the background area right here. And so this is where we're going to talk about combining designs and how to use it to create different techniques or effects. So whether I want to use it to separate two designs, whether I want to draw attention to a particular area, or maybe I just want a way to learn a new design. So we're going to kind of go over that, and I've got my trusty whiteboard to show you. So I love drawing out the designs because I think it's a lot easier to talk through them. And if you know how the design goes together, you're already 80% there on the machine quilting part of it. Okay, so when we're talking about combining designs, there is a rough outline that you can follow. Basically, I want to have a couple of bigger designs or designs that need more space to develop. So for me, that would be something like maybe a flower. Right, so this would be one of my bigger designs. It could be maybe even a feather. Whatever it is, this is going to be my bigger elements. Then I need to pick designs that are going to work like fillers, right? Designs that don't need a lot of room to develop, or designs that can go and fit in a lot of irregularly shaped areas. So those would be like pebbles, could be some. It could be just a meandering line. Back and forth lines are one of my favorites as well. And even sometimes it could be something like a wishbone. So basically, I'm going to put my bigger elements in first, and then I'm going to fill in around it with my filler elements. And we're going to talk about that here in just a second. Now, when you're thinking about combining designs, before we even get to that, you don't have to sit down and have a roadmap, right? You don't have to say, okay, these are the bigger designs I'm going to use, and these are the filler designs. But if you need some kind of guideline, that will definitely help you out. And you can combine as many designs as you want. So this is kind of like a choose your own quilting adventure. You can just use two designs together, or you can switch it up and make a lot of different designs in there. So a lot of fun. But let's start with the very basics and talk about how we fill in areas, and then show you how you can really expand on this to create some cool effects. All right, so here is my square, my very, very wonky square. Let's push it up so you can see it a little bit better. All right. So what I'm going to do is when I'm practicing my machine quilting, I think it's important to practice within a defined area because that's going to make you deal with corners and filling in the whole space consistently, but it's also going to give you a sense of completion, like a sense of, okay, I'm done, I filled this in, perfect. Okay, so let's start quilting our bigger element. So I'm going to start with my bigger one, maybe my flower, right? And I'm not even thinking about what's coming next, I'm just enjoying this moment. And then I can think, what do I want to quilt next? I can do another flower, but maybe I'll do a swirl. So I'm going to add my bigger elements. But then, as I begin to start filling in my area, we're going to quickly see two things. We're going to see where we get gaps in between the designs, or where we have gaps in between the design and the boundary. So if I have a gap up here, or an area that needs to be quilted, I'm going to make sure that I fill that in while I'm there. What I don't want to do is get too far away and have to come back. I want this quilting to kind of start like a blob and kind of build off of itself. So how I'm going to do that is I'm going to use echoing to get back to where I need to go because I want to fill in this corner, and then I'm going to add my fillers or my smaller pieces. And like I said, it can be a meander. And then once all my little gap is filled in, then I can either keep doing that if I want to, or I can go back into my next bigger design, right? So I'm kind of switching back and forth to make sure that the whole area is filled in. If there's nothing else you remember from this live chat, remember that. We want the whole area to be filled in because people will notice a gap in the quilting before they notice an error. I mean, I say it like it's truth. I'm pretty sure it's a fact, but that's my truth. I want to make sure everything is filled in, and I'm going to use my echoing and my smaller designs to do that, right? So at any point, I can echo, get where I need to go, and start filling it in. Now, some quilters don't like things quilted to death, and that's completely fine. You know, I love a lot of quilting. Quilt it till it's too much and add a little bit more has always been my motto. But you can make this as dense or as less dense as you'd like. So even if you're thinking, I don't want a lot of quilting, that doesn't matter. You can still combine designs and get some cool effects. All you're going to do is space out the distance between your lines. So if I quilt mine 1/4 inch apart, you might quilt yours 1/2 or 1 inch apart. It doesn't matter. The same thing is still going to apply. So as I'm going now, I'm going to switch to something else, maybe another swirl, maybe another flower. And we see here, now I have another gap in my area. I'm going to handle that while I'm there. This is really going to help you fill in that area and be more efficient with your quilting. Now, one of the questions that sometimes come up though is, what if you get stuck, right? I'm sure that doesn't happen to you, right? But it happens to me. Sometimes I find myself where I don't need to be. I need to get out of there, right? Well, what I'm going to do is either travel along the edge, I might travel along my previously quilted line, I'm going to do whatever I need to do to get out. I might even just kind of hop over and cross some lines. Here's the thing, when you have all this stuff quilted in, you're not going to see those little bitty mistakes. You're just going to keep on going and filling in the whole area. All right, so then another bigger element, and then some smaller things to fill in the gaps, maybe some meanders. And I'm kind of making this not as pretty as it could be, but the whole idea is I want to make sure that there are no gaps, right? Now, if I decide to combine designs like this, right, what I have is a beautiful texture. I have it so that one design isn't showing up more than another. That's because all the spacing is pretty much consistent between them, and I don't have any gaps, so it's going to give me that beautiful, beautiful texture. Okay, so maybe you're thinking, oh, that's a lot of decisions to make. Well, what I love about combining designs is you can use it in a number of different ways. So first of all, you can use it to learn a new design. So Mindy brought up a great question on the chat. She said she wants to practice, but she feels like she might be wasting time and money. Does anybody else feel that way? And I feel like, yeah, I'm sure sometimes you're learning something and you're like, oh man, I just wish I could just know it. But here's the thing, when it comes to practicing, when you're learning a brand new design, that can be super overwhelming and scary. That's like jumping into the deep end of the pool. Instead of doing that, let's transition, right? Let's use something that we feel comfortable with quilting and then add to it. So let's pretend you're the meandering champion of the world and you like to do a meander. Well, I'll do it over here so we can see it. Meander is just a line that kind of wiggles around. But maybe you want to start building past that. Maybe you want to just stretch just a little bit. Maybe you want to start doing some loops, Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to fill in our area. We're going to start with a design that we like to quilt because we're comfortable. And if you're like, I'm not even comfortable with one design, well, practice that design until you get comfortable with it. And then every once in a while, whenever you're ready, you can throw in a different shape, right? Whew. You can hold your breath, quilt that loop, and then continue on. And pretty soon, you'll be doing loops like no problem. And then you'll think, I'm ready for another challenge. This is too easy. And I might do some swirls. And I realize that's a little too hard, so maybe I'm going to go back to my meander. But the idea is you can use combining designs as a way to transition into something new. Now, for those of you that do pantographs or computerized quilting, this is still the case. Sometimes I'll have long armers say, I love my pantographs, but I want to get better, but I'm scared. Well, what I would suggest is quilt out a couple of rows, leave about an inch gap, and do some echoing in between them. Just a little bit of area to fill in so that you're not jumping into that deep end. So using it as a way to transition from one to the next, or to build your quilting repertoire. This is a great way to practice. The problem is when we're learning something new, we tend to hold our breath and tense up. So if you're only doing something new in little bits, you won't pass out from holding your breath. All right, another way that I like to use combining designs is to transition in between designs. Now this is a cool effect. It's very easy to do, but where I have one design, let's say Pebbles, that turns into Pebbles and Swirls and then turns into Swirls. So I'm going to need my two designs that go together well. So I've got my swirl and my Pebbles. And what I'm going to do is, depending on how much thought I want to put into it, I could say, you know what, in this area, I'm going to quilt Pebbles. And in this one, I'm going to quilt Swirls and Pebbles. And in this one, I'm going to just quilt Swirls. And what will happen is after those lines are removed, if you mark them, or you could just kind of use it as a rough guide, once I begin to cross over into this boundary, whatever this area I have determined, then I know I'm going to start quilting Swirls and Pebbles. Now I just happen to know that those combine very well because they're similar shapes. And then continue on. But as I reach the next area, and I'm just kind of going in a row so we can see this, I would never leave these gaps right here. I would definitely handle those while I was there. But as I start to cross into that third area, that's where I'm going to just do my swirls. Now, I know this drawing isn't super pretty. This is a perfect example that you don't have to draw well to quilt. Sometimes when I tell people that they should practice drawing out designs, usually I hear, but my drawing is so bad. I'm like, that's not why we're doing it. We're just learning how the design goes together. But what happens is as I continue on, and when I erase my marks, then I have this really cool effect where it goes from one design to the next. This can be really helpful if you want to draw attention to an area, like maybe there's something in this corner that I want to show off. That dense pebbles are really going to show it off, but maybe I don't want to do pebbles over the whole quilt, right? I usually don't want to do pebbles over the whole quilt because they take forever, but doing a little bit right here, then moving off definitely gives you the effect without all the work. So I like to be efficient with my time and my quilting. So let's see what that would look like. Let's say we'll just do a feather, right? So here's my feather. And let's say I really want it to show off, right? Like I want this to be really cool and interesting. So I could do pebbles real close to it, right? Just do a couple rows, basically pretending that this is where my pebbles are going to go. But then as I move out, I can transition into pebbles and swirls, and then eventually transition right into my swirls. And so I have that dense pop of quilting right around it, but it's not going to be as long or as difficult as quilting pebbles everywhere. So combining designs allows you to get a little bit of detail without committing to it. All right, one second, everybody. I'm going to move. Sorry, there's a spammer on there. I'm going to hide it. Okay, anyway. So I'm using the quilting here to really draw attention, and that's something I was doing on that Twist in Time quilt that we saw. I had the paisley feathers in the corner, and then I put some pebbles in there and some swirls. So definitely a fun way. There's also a technique. Now we're kind of starting with the basic, and we're kind of building up to the little bit more. I won't say it's advanced, but it's just a little bit more to think about. You can combine designs to really highlight an area, right? So In the first example, I was combining my designs so that they're all mixed in together. There's no rhyme or reason. It's just whatever happens, happens. Now this time I'm going to be a lot more intentional about that to create a secondary effect. So kind of like what we saw with combining designs to transition from one to the other, except here we're going to be much more intentional about it. So let's pretend I have my element, let's say this is my block right here, and then I have my pretty swirl chain. So we'll pretend it's pretty. Now I have my different area right here. Well, if I want to show this off, right, like I did with the feather before, and I put those dense pebbles, I can combine designs in a slightly different way. Maybe I want to do some wishbones that are really going to kind of flatten that area and make that swirl chain pop. The problem with wishbones, though, is that they really need a defined area to fill in. So I need to either go all the way down and quilt my wishbones so they fill this whole area, which is fine, that could definitely work, or I can combine designs by using my smaller filler design to kind of even up that irregular area. So now I would have my little bit smaller area to quilt that shape. Now, when you're going from one design to the next, that's a question that comes up sometimes. It's like, how do I switch? Well, you just do. They're kind of like cursive letters. They kind of hook into each other. So don't feel like you have to, have this special trick. It's just stop and then go into your next design in here. I'm going to go into my pebbles. I'm going to fill in this little area because I feel like it's a little too far to go. I'm going to get back to where I started and then continue on. So I'm combining those designs to really show off an area, but also using the quilting to take the area and make it fit what I need it to fit. So if you see a quilt where I've done this, and this is what I did on the Twist in Time quilt, I had some pebbles down here in these points, well, just because it was a really long area and I knew that that would kind of fill it in and still give me that really neat effect. Now, when you're looking at the designs that you're going to combine, there's a couple things to think about. We've already saw where the bigger designs go in first, right? So the bigger elements, the things that need more space to develop, right? So a pebble doesn't need a whole lot of space to develop. It could be pretty small, as opposed to, let's say, the swirl chain, which is going to take some echoing and really fill it in. But you also need to think about designs that need defined areas. And this is where we're getting to the next little thing to think about. So on my wishbone, this is a perfect example. This particular design works best when it fills in a defined area. I have two edges. Now, most of the time, that would be like a sashing, right? I would use it in a sashing or a border. But here, I'm using it, it's an irregularly defined area, but it's still defined. So there's other designs that are like that. If you have a design like that that you want to use, you need to make sure that you fill in your area, you make your area first. So I think I just kind of geek out over this kind of stuff, but the whole idea is if we're going to use it as a filler, we have to have the main elements in first, right? So I would quilt my swirl chain first, and I would make it look really pretty, and then I might travel down and I might just do, let's just do another one. I would go ahead and do those bigger elements first so that now I have my area in between that I can start filling in. Now, we've already seen the wishbones, that those work in a defined area, but we could also use back and forth lines. Oh, that marker is much better. See how it kind of just fills in that area? Or it could be some wavy line designs. Just because it's a filler doesn't mean it can't be really cool and intricate. But if you look at a quilt and you're like, I don't know what came first, which was quilted first, I can almost guarantee the bigger elements were quilted first and then the filler fills in around it. I mean, if you think about it, it kind of makes sense. And so again, I'm just doing this wavy line that kind of goes back and forth. Now what's going to happen is the contrast here, and we saw this when I talked about feathers, the difference in direction is really going to make those elements pop out. Okay, last one. So we talked about, how to combine them quickly on how to transition in between them. Now let's talk about how to make certain elements show up more than others. Okay, so if we know that most people will notice a gap in the quilting, that's where our attention is drawn. That's what we're going to use to our advantage now. So before, remember I said let's quilt all the designs with the same spacing, try not to leave any gaps. Well, in this particular example, we're going to throw that out the window and change up the density. So density, again, is just the spacing between your quilting lines. and density, if you have enough difference between it, it's going to make one element pop out as opposed to the other. Or if you have an unquilted area. Now, why would you want that? Well, maybe a couple reasons. Maybe you are feeling very comfortable with your flowers, so you make them a little bit bigger. They're going to show up a little bit more. But maybe your pebbles not so much, or maybe your other swirls aren't as easy. So doing them a little smaller will help them kind of hide. Doesn't that seem kind of backwards? You might think, oh, if I quilt small, it'll be noticeable. No, what's going to be noticeable is this unquilt, this bigger pop of area right here. So maybe I don't feel so comfortable with my other design, so I'm going to do these bigger so they show up a little bit more. Perfect way to tiptoe into those designs. Another reason is maybe there's an element in the quilt that you want to show off, so you're using that change of contrast or that change of density to draw attention to it. So maybe this is the whole quilt and this is my favorite block, and so I'm going to put some of the bigger, prettier designs around it just to kind of draw attention to it. So it's a really fun way to do that. And these, once you get comfortable with this idea of switching between designs, it could be a lot of fun to challenge yourself and see like, okay, what can I come up with? Now, when I talk about changing the density, make sure that there's enough difference that it looks intentional. Right, so we want it to look like we meant to do it, whether we did or didn't. So if these are about a ½ inch apart, I want these lines to be about a ¼ inch. I want there to be enough difference that it looks like I meant to do it. So let's do some swirls here. Another one of my favorite designs to combine would be clamshells. Because I don't feel comfortable quilting clamshells over a whole area, but I can sure quilt them in a little pop, in a little cluster, and then move on. I shouldn't say I don't feel comfortable quilting clamshells in a whole area. I should say filling that design in a whole area, if you don't have it quite right, it can look more noticeable than I'd like. So adding some clamshells here and there is a great way to have fun with the design without committing to using it over the whole quilt. But no matter what I do, I want to make sure that whole area is filled in, right? That's the most important thing. All right, last thought here. How do you know if something is a gap, or how do you know if you should go back and fill it in? Well, in this particular example, I don't mind that these are all different spaces, but if I'm quilting them with this consistent spacing, I want it to all kind of blend into each other. I don't want one to show up more than the other. If the gap is about the same size as the spacing between your lines, then I would totally leave it. So let's say I leave an area unquilted over here. Don't you wish quilting came off this easy? That would be awesome, wouldn't it? So I have a gap up in that corner. It's about the same size as some of those bigger spacings, so it wouldn't be super noticeable if I left it. But if I had a bunch of small quilting and that was my gap, I would go back and fill it in. Again, that's completely up to you and your preferences. It's just kind of my rule of thumb. So I always like to have some kind of rule to follow, because then I'll know, just makes it easier. So if it's bigger than the spacing, then I'm gonna fill it in. So hopefully that helped give you a little bit of inspiration for quilting your quilts. This, again, is such a great way to practice. So let's say you're doing swirls, you decide you're going to try a little feather, you're like, oh, nope, that wasn't fun, then just move on and keep doing your swirls. So don't feel like you have to always use the same design, or that you have to have this perfect ratio. Just as long as the whole thing is filled in, it's going to look great. So hopefully that helps. Now, Mindy, when she asked about practicing, a couple tips for practicing, it's a little off the topic, but charity quilts are a great way to practice. So you're doing your best quilting right now, so you should put it on a charity quilt, and it could definitely help somebody out. Another thing is panels. Panels are a great way. And then if you're like wanting practice for practice sake, you're not really wanting, it's not like you're invested in the quilt sandwich. Once the quilt sandwich is quilted, you can put another piece of fabric right on top of it and start quilting away again. So it can affect your tension a little bit, but this is more for scrap pieces or pieces that you're just practicing on. That tip really kind of clicked for us at the shop, because we do a lot of demoing. I'm like, oh, we just put another fabric on top. Don't have to reload the quilt. So hopefully that helps. All right, let's see some questions that are coming through. I have trouble making consistent pebble size. I almost always strive to make them different. Perfect. That's perfect. Making them different sizes is making it easier. If you struggle with consistency, just know that comes with practice. Don't you hate hearing that word? Practice, practice, practice. But it does, you'll get more consistent with practice. So I tell people, it's like worrying about what your handwriting is going to look like when you're still learning how to write your letters. So just keep writing your letters and soon you'll have that consistency. Another thing that will help, especially if you're struggling with keeping it consistent over a whole area, is either having a visual representation of something in your mind, like quarter sized or M&M size or something that you know, because it will kind of give you a frame of reference, or keeping a little sketch right next to it will help you kind of check back and forth, like, okay, it's kind of staying consistent. But then again, you know, having different sizes is fun too. All right. Yes, so Becca, right, putting another fabric on top just for practice. I learned that when I went for to Handy Quilter for training. I was like, oh my gosh, so smart. Anyway, so very, very fun. Maggie, what causes eyelashing when making pebbles? If eyelashing is tension problems, it's when you're seeing your top thread on the bottom. And it depends. If you're eyelashing or you're getting those either way, bad tension either way, if it only happens when you're working on the pebbles, it could be that you're moving too fast for the machine, like as it's going around. If it's happening all the time, then it's a tension issue. So just keep going, and as you get smoother and more comfortable working through those shapes, you'll do fine. Anyway, okay, so combining designs, a really fun way to have practice with your designs, and it's a lot more fun, and it keeps me engaged because I get easily bored. So hopefully you'll go home and try, or you are at home, hopefully you'll give that a try. How about a sneak peek though? So the next live chat, which will be in like 7 days, is going to be all about the newest Free Motion Challenge Quilting Along. And if you haven't participated in a Free Motion Challenge, this would be the perfect opportunity. So it started, gosh, a few years ago, where I decided to do a video series where we would work on the same quilt and we would work through some designs. So think of it like a video series, or it's like you know, personal training for your machine quilting. Now, I started about 3 or 4 challenges in to design panels so that you could quilt along on the project. But you don't have to have the panel. It doesn't cost anything to participate. So I try to make it really easy so that if you're wanting to get better at free motion quilting, you can definitely do that. So each challenge has had a theme, and can you believe that this will be my 10th challenge? Isn't that crazy? Oh, it's just like, wow. Anyway, so this challenge's theme is going to be called Flora and Foliage. So these are going to be nature-inspired designs, just a way to group them. So we're going to be doing wood grain, we're doing flowers, we're going to be doing paisleys and leaves, and talking about how to quilt those designs. But the panel, if you want to see, it's a little wrinkly because it was folded up, but I'll give you a sneak peek. So here is the panel. So we're going to be filling in all those beautiful areas with our different designs. So super excited. It's very different for me. I haven't worked with these colors before, so a lot of fun. And then the backing, this is going to be the backing if you get the backing. And how pretty is that going to be as a little binding? And then we'll have an optional border panel. So in the past, we've done a panel, we've done a border panel, and then we've done backing if you want. But for the first time, I'm designing coordinating prints to go with the panel. So these are I'm going to just show you one of them, but this is a coordinating fabric that you'll be able to purchase, whether you do the challenge or not. Whether you want it, you can get it, or if you don't have to. But there's that wood grain design, and then I'll have this in 2 different colorways. So I'll have that pretty maroon color, deep color, and then that navy. But you know what's amazing about this? I'm so excited. I designed this so that it's continuous. You can actually quilt along these lines and practice your wood grain, or use it because you think it makes a really pretty fabric. But for those of you that are wanting a little bit more practice, I like to call these training wheels for quilters, because you're going to kind of quilt over those lines and kind of get comfortable with how the design goes together. So I'll be telling you more about the fabrics, but that one, this was a lot of fun to make. Took a while to get it figured out, but you'll be able to quilt continuously along that. So very, very fun. I hope that if you want to learn how to free motion quilt, you'll join me for the challenge. But if you don't, no problem. We'll still be back with new episodes of the Midnight Quilter. So we'll definitely be seeing the piecing aspect of quilts. And I just hope you'll come along and have a good time with me. If you've liked the video, I hope you'll give a thumbs up or subscribe, and definitely be sure to check in for my next chat, because I'm going to have all sorts of details about the next Free Motion Challenge. Well, thanks everybody for spending this last half an hour with me. I will see you very soon. Stay safe and happy quilting.